Hey folks, Chris Versace here, and it is time for another episode of the Stocks and Market Podcast, where we dig deep into what's going on in the markets and talk about stocks. This time around, very excited. We have a exciting company joining us today on the topic, rather timely, I think, about nuclear energy and uranium. We've known that there's been a lot of questions about what we refer to as the electricity pain point, given the rise of AI and data center construction, but we also know that there are other aspects pressuring, let's just say, the grid. We are seeing more companies start to suss out potential solutions in nuclear. And with me today to talk about this and how his company is positioned is Mark Mukhija of Eagle Nuclear Energy. Mark, thank you so much for joining me.
Hey, Chris, nice to be here.
Excellent, excellent. So Mark, before we get started, tell me a little bit about your background. How did you come to Eagle? What attracted you to the opportunity?
Yeah, so my background is in mining engineering. So I have my professional designation. I started my career with BHP in Australia. So that's where I got my technical and operational foundation. From there, I spent some time in underground and open pit diamonds, and then a few years in energy coal. And then in 2016, I moved into the mining technology sector. So this was a company that was using AI, machine learning, and computer vision around making mining safer and more productive. Now, they saw that I worked in Australia and they shipped me back out there. So I was running Asia Pacific. Yeah, I was running Asia Pacific for them for 5 years and got the tech deployed at some of the biggest mining companies in the world. And I got to see just how important innovation was, not just for the mining industry, but every industry. So it helped shape my conviction that clean power, reliable energy, and advanced technology, they all converge in that nuclear space. So I wanted to be a part of that, and that led to the creation of Eagle Energy in late 2023.
Now, you said the creation. So it says that the company's been around a little over 3 years. How did it get started, and how is it positioned differently today compared to when you were first starting out?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we saw this wave coming, the AI, data centers, cryptocurrencies, humanoid robotics, and they're going to require a lot more power. And the grid is simply tapped out today. And the only way that you're going to address that is through nuclear. And I have some friends and founders that are in the capital markets industry, and we always wanted to be a part of the nuclear story, and I believe we got in at the right time to find a great uranium asset paired with SMR technology to build this integrated nuclear company that Eagle is.
All right, so let's break those two things down. You talked about the asset that you have. I assume you're talking about uranium. Correct me if I'm wrong. So let's talk on that for a second. Where did that come from? What's the lead time to tap that? How long and how long will that last? And then let's talk about that SMR technology.
Sure. So as I mentioned, we wanted to get involved in the nuclear space, and everything nuclear starts with uranium, but it
Mhm.
had to be an American asset. We wanted it to be a part of the national security and energy dependence movement that's happening in the United States. So we were looking at assets in the United States of size and scale, and we came across the Aurora uranium deposit, which was held by an Australian company. We had talks with them, and we were able to come to an agreement to get the largest mineable measured and indicated uranium deposit in the United States. So on an unconstrained basis, there's 50 million pounds there. And then when you put a technical report on it, SK 1300 compliant technical report summary, there's about 37 million pounds that has a reasonable probability of economic extraction right now under current prices. And that could be a 14 plus year mine life there. So it
So
helps. Yep.
So you're sitting on top of this asset, and I'm just wondering, and I don't expect you to have the answer, but as we think about how people are viewing, your company and more importantly, the shares, I'm wondering how much value is being placed to that asset, given the size and the life cycle for it versus the other side of the business. But that's something we can talk about later. I'm getting, as I
Yeah.
tend to do, a little ahead of
Mhm.
myself.
Yeah, no worries. I guess just to answer that on a high level, our priority is that uranium asset and the SMR technology. It's great, but it's more of our call option on the nuclear future. We know that that flagship uranium asset is tech agnostic. It doesn't matter if it's going into a traditional reactor or some of these other advanced small modular reactors. So we know that that is our priority, given the importance of uranium to the nation.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense to me. So let's talk about where you are in terms of monetizing that asset.
Yeah, so it's still in advanced exploration. Our baseline estimate to begin production is the early 2030s, and there's a few steps that need to happen first,
Hmm.
such as we're kicking off a technical work program this summer, which is going to give us information on metallurgy, hydrogeology, and rock mechanics, along with some further exploration drilling, which could enhance the size of the resource because you'll get more information on parts of the deposit that doesn't have drill holes right now. And then that information feeds into the pre-feasibility study, which will take a year to complete once we start it. So perhaps you're looking at Q3, Q4 of next year, when it will be completed. And then from there, it's into construction and design, pending that everything it gets financed and approved on the permitting side of things, which we'll be doing in parallel with that work program. So going through the permitting process as well.
Okay, so on the one hand, some folks who would say, especially the folks who are very long-term focused and bullish on the nuclear opportunity, they would say, okay, I have a known timeline over the next, few years. I can track certain hurdles to that. Great. Some other folks would turn around and say, hmm, interesting, but this seems to suggest that there's not going to be a lot of revenue in the next 1, 2, maybe 3 years. If that's the case, how is the company capitalized and how do you plan on getting, having enough capital to get to that 2029, 2030 timeframe?
Yeah, for sure. And we were a D-SPAC transaction. And as a part of our D-SPAC, we got $30 million from a singular institutional investor. And we also had $5 million stay in trust at the SPAC. So net of fees, we have about $31 million in the bank right now. And that should last us for a couple years. And then what we'll do with that money is start that work program, as I mentioned, do the engineering study, and do the permitting parts that we can begin now. So that should give us a couple years to do that. And it's the mining industry. So as long as we can show that we're doing what we're saying we're going to do and hitting our milestones and executing, we believe that there'll be an opportunity for us to go back to the market, let's say a year from now, and raise
Hmm.
more capital, just based on how important uranium is to the country. Now, the United States only has 1% of the global reserves in the world. So it's incredibly important to get every single pound of American uranium out of the ground.
I would have to imagine, given what you just said, that there could have been or could be in the coming quarters, folks who are seeing your progress and saying, you know what, we need this resource. This could be a M&A opportunity for us.
Absolutely. Or it could be for us to look around and say,
Right.
there's an opportunity for us to take a look as well. Chris, when we were looking at this asset, we looked at multiple other assets as well in the United States, and we do believe there is a consolidation opportunity. So perhaps we are the ones that are doing the M&A. But
I like
as a
I
company, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say I like the bulls up. I like it.
Yeah. And look, our we know our priority is to just de-risk this asset as much as possible, be it through work programs, be it through engineering studies, be it through permitting.
Okay. So that's one side. Let's talk about this call option that you referred to as SMR or small modular reactors. There's a lot of talk about this. There's a lot of money, I'll say, being thrown at this, including some of those big hyperscalers that have made announcements, various announcements and investments in nuclear power. What's the reality? Where are we with SMR? When does it really start to happen?
For us or for the industry?
Let's take for the industry first, and then you can tell me about you guys, because I get the sense it might be a little different.
Yeah, for sure. So for the industry itself, we are seeing a lot of good work happen We could be seeing first of a kind reactors come to the market 2029, 2030, so the end of the decade. So I'm in the belief of there's going to be multiple players in that field at different sizes. So you'll have the micro reactors, which might have a few players. You'll have the slightly larger in the 50 megawatt kind of zone. You'll have a few players there, and then into the larger 100 to 300 megawatt players. So I do believe it's a necessity to have the SMRs, just simply because of the incremental power demand that's coming. I do think there's a huge opportunity in extending current traditional reactors and doing
Hmm.
uprates on that end. Essentially, Chris, what I'm getting at is that we're going to need all the power we can get.
Well, yes. So do you see more mothballed reactors coming back online? I understand there's a lot of challenges with that, given the way some of them might have been decommissioned, the use of concrete, for example, and other things.
I think that is the biggest lowest, sorry, that's the lowest hanging fruit we do have in bringing more capacity online is just evaluating what can we turn back on, what can we extend, what can we already use that we have. And I know that the DOE is doing a great job of making funds available for that. You just have to look back to the executive orders that came out in 2025 around that, wanting to add 5 gigawatts to
Hmm.
existing
Hmm.
reactors. You want to have 10 gigawatts of new reactors by 2030. You want to quadruple nuclear by 2050. So you can see it's essentially all hands on deck when it comes to everything nuclear. And simply we have to do it to remain competitive.
So we talk a lot about the U.S.'s, need for nuclear power, the need to tap the modest reserves that it has on the uranium front. But what about from a, international perspective, particularly say with SMR? Are we likely to see those, solutions come on stream earlier there than in the U.S., do you think?
Potentially. We do see the push globally for nuclear as well. We had 31 countries sign up to triple their nuclear by 2050. So the push is definitely on. You can see it with China, just with the amount of reactors they have under construction and what they plan to be building. It's immense. And China doesn't produce much uranium. So it's going to become a lot more competitive to get the uranium that is already out there. China's aiming to build over 200 reactors in the next 15 years. You
Eh, and I just have to think about, what we've seen in March and now early April, the U.S.-Iran, let's just say, conflict. A lot of uncertainty, obviously, but it has highlighted the nature of oil supply demand constraints. The rumblings are that we're already starting to see the influence rekindle demand for EVs. I have to imagine from your perspective, you see it as a sharp reminder about why ultimately we need more nuclear power.
Absolutely. And this was before my time, but in the 70s, when there was the energy crisis, then it led to a fivefold increase in nuclear investment. Could potentially be the same thing happening this time around. You've got 20% of the world's oil essentially at a standstill right now.
Hmm.
And it shows these countries around the world that rely on it that we need to smarten up here and become energy independent. And the best way to do that is through nuclear power.
Now, why not say other forms of quote clean energy, wind, solar? Each one has its drawbacks. And do you ultimately see, I think, the consistent need for power, focusing the need for a solution that's nuclear based over some of these others that, they provide incremental power, some would say, at the edges, but not really addressing the real issue.
Yeah, well, for nuclear, it's that reliable baseload power. Just simply look at the capacity factor, 92%. Capacity factor being a measure of maximum power output. So nuclear is 92, wind is 35%, solar is 25%. So, the sun's not always going to shine and the wind's not always going to be blowing. And look, if it's the big tech companies out there that need the power, you better believe it can deliver when they need it.
Yeah, I would say the math doesn't lie. Kind of simple.
Mhm.
Okay, so as you sit here, the tailwind appears to be blowing pretty hard for nuclear. You guys are positioned for that in a couple different ways. Let's talk a little bit more on the SMR front. What separates you guys from the competitive herd? What's your go-to-market strategy here? And are you seeing interest from some of these big hyperscalers or others out there, these neo clouds and the like?
Yeah, I think the biggest differentiation we have is that we have access to the fuel supply, the raw uranium upstream. And then when this technology was presented to us, it was simply too good to pass by. It's been around since the 2010s. The inventor's got 40 years of experience, 400 authored papers. His work's been cited 9,000 times. So it really was a great tech. And, it is that fully portable, walk-away safe, liquid metal cooled fast reactor. These can be factory mass assembled, shipped to site. And there's actually two designs in it. So a 3.3 megawatt microreactor and a 33 megawatt small modular reactor. So, the interesting thing that I find is that, in that micro design, let's say, 3.3 megawatts at full power, and it can go for 6 years without any kind of refueling or intervention. But if you dial that back into the low power setting, let's say 0.3 megawatts, can still power 300 homes. That thing can operate for 92 years without any intervention. You can bury it underground and forget about it. So think about that for remote communities, off-grid applications,
Hmm.
all those kind of applications that we can use it for, and it becomes a really compelling case to use this type of technology instead of diesel generators and things of that nature.
That's fascinating because I think a lot of folks are really focused in on um, electric utility capital spending. They're focused in on AI data center, and some other things that are really driving it. But it's interesting when we talk about, the edge of the grid, so to speak, like you just
Hmm.
did. I don't think a lot of people are seeing that and what
Hmm.
that potential solution is for, again, say certain aspects of electric utility spending.
Yeah,
Fascinating.
for sure. And you can use it in areas that don't have water as well. You can use the open air Brayton cycles, or think of all the coal mines that have shut down around the country. They have all the lines in place. You can throw small modular reactors there and, rekindle the region in terms of jobs and power. So there's a lot of opportunity that the country should be looking at here, what we can do with all types of small modular reactors, not just our design.
So when you're watching, the competitive landscape and the growing acceptance of this from an industry perspective, are there things that you're watching that could accelerate the timeline for SMRs? And at the same time, is there anything on the horizon that could potentially push out the timing for SMRs?
Yeah, I think investment can always move things forward, and along with the regulation as well. So we're already starting to see that with the NRC, you know, bringing in different codes to make it faster to get permits and licenses to operate these SMRs. And then again, if we start seeing more investment from big tech coming into SMR companies, I think that could accelerate it as well. They're already taking matters into their own hands and securing their
Mm.
energy supply, right? We've seen PPAs with Constellation, with the Crane Clean Energy Center, with the Illinois reactor as well with Meta. So they are taking matters into their own hands. And then I guess what could slow down the industry is that, let's say they try to go too quickly and something happened where, they're cutting a corner and, there's some kind of incident. These Gen 4 reactors, they can't melt down like your old school Chernobyl style anyways, but it's something you need to be mindful of as an industry to prevent anything from happening, because we don't need that type of attention on what we're doing.
Totally agree. And just for folks who are maybe fixated on, and I will date myself, 3 Mile Island, for example, or you just mentioned Chernobyl. You said that these Gen 4 reactors are different. How is it that they're different? What should give folks comfort that yes, these are far safer than what we saw in the past?
Well, simply because the technology's evolved so far from now, right? So it's 40 years ago when you had the Chernobyl incident, and even longer for 3 Mile Island. So technology has evolved quite a bit. So with these Gen 4 reactors, they're passively cooled and they can just shut down and cool down. And there's not much enriched uranium in these and enriched fuel in these reactors anyways, right? So it's just a scale thing and a technological thing where, you're not going to see those incidences. And there's so many inherent safety methodologies built into it, such as, auxiliary power is something that some of these reactors have, and ours does especially, where, even if there was a mass power outage like there was in Fukushima, there's still power to the reactor where it will safely shut down and cool off without any kind of issues happening.
So for the layperson who's concerned about nuclear power, you would say that the risks today far, far less than they were 30, 40 years ago.
Absolutely.
Okay. Okay. What other catalysts can you see, Mark, that from an investor perspective, as you're looking for more investment, kind of says, boy, not only is the company hitting its timelines, it's surpassing what was expected. Is there any hurdles that people should be looking for as they track Eagle's progress?
Yeah, I would definitely say we touched on it earlier, the M&A opportunity if we start acquiring other assets, and
Hmm.
simply as we start moving through the engineering studies, the drilling, and the permitting process. We're getting a lot of administrative support, and I think that's only going to continue as we realize just how much power we're going to need to remain competitive. It's a national security, energy independence thing right now. And, if another nation has more power than us, they could have better AI and better models, and we simply can't be in a position where that's the case.
Understood. Understood. Talk to me a little bit about the team. You said the company was created about 3 years ago. How have you fleshed out the team? And then I think you also alluded to the person that's kind of behind the SMR technology as being extremely well positioned within the industry. Just give us a little more about the team, because really, given the opportunity and the timeline that spans, more than a few quarters, the management team is very important.
Yeah, for sure. And it starts with the boots on the ground, let's say. And, we have a very strong VP operations that's a professional geologist. He's ran mining companies in the past, has banking experience. So he brings that ability to put our work program together in terms of who's going to be the drillers, who's going to do the engineering studies, where are we going to drill, how are we going to get the most traction for the work that we're going to do. We've hired a permitting firm called SLR that's put two other projects in our county on the Fast 41 program, which you might recall is a part of that March 2025 executive order around boosting domestic mineral production. So these guys have the playbook of how to get onto that dashboard and how to potentially accelerate what we're doing and knowing that the region that we're operating in. We have a head of licensing that's got 27 years of nuclear experience. 20 years of that is with Entergy. So knowing all of our activities will have a NRC lens on it gives us a lot of comfort as well. Plus the numerous consultants that we have on board as well. Plus we're hiring. We're looking for great people to be a
Excellent.
part of our story and our journey, right? We want to move quickly. We want to, do things the right way. So we're always looking for talent.
Are you having a tough time finding the talent that you need, Mark?
I think it's an industry-wide thing, finding the right people in, especially in nuclear, because we lost a lot of that expertise over the last few decades. But I think when the story is compelling enough, people want to be involved. And we do get a lot of inbound requests of people wanting to understand what we're up to, and that's what we want to be a part of, right? We want to be a part of re-onshoring nuclear energy.
Okay. And then, we talked a little bit about the microreactors as a kind of solution for some areas that perhaps not everybody's thinking about. Obviously, people are talking about AI and data center, but from your perspective, is there any driver of the demand for nuclear power that folks are not thinking about, not focused on, not clued in on? Some extra added tailwind that gets overlooked.
Absolutely. And it's humanoid robotics. If Elon gets his way, there'll be more robots than people, right?
And
And
wait. Elon, not Jensen?
both of them.
Okay.
Both of them. Big tech, let's say. The whole electrification, automation industry, it's like our grid's tapped out today, Chris. You start adding that into the mix, the power models, I don't think any of them are correct. I think we're going to need a heck of a lot more power than even what those models are saying. And especially when you add in the potential of what other nations are doing. And if we are constrained by power, our models are not going to be as strong as other nations. So as I mentioned at the top of the call, we need as much power as we can possibly get. And nuclear is going to have to play such a huge part in that to get to where we need to go.
I would take that comment that you just made about robotics and say the same thing for AI and data center capacity because of the explosion that we're going to see for data creation, consumption, and the use of those robotics.
Absolutely.
So, and
Yep.
that all that does is it brings another tailwind in the power that we need for nuclear from AI and data center.
100%. These models are constantly evolving and improving, so that requires a lot of compute. Plus, computational capacity always goes up. There's quantum computing that's just around the corner as well. So there's a lot of catalysts, let's say, for power demand coming.
A lot of reasons to be bullish, no question. Let's flip it though, and I would be remiss if I didn't say, Mark, what is it that keeps you awake at night? What is it, not from an industry perspective, but more of a company perspective, that you as the man in the big seat, you need to keep your eye on?
I would just say making sure we do things the right way in terms of permitting. So make sure we get all of that in hand, because we know in this country it takes a long time to get mines from discovery to production. And a lot of that time is in the permitting side of things. So we want to make sure we dot our I's and cross our T's and get all of that done correctly, and try to get this in hand as fast as we can while doing it in the right way.
And for the person that may not be as familiar with it, permitting generally takes how long?
It could take anywhere from 5 to 7 years, but we are seeing that condense, especially with things like the Fast 41 program, accelerated environmental reviews, and just given the importance of these critical minerals, we're starting to see it in different areas, right? In terms of defense applications and power generation, I do feel that we've just gotten a big wake-up call on the geopolitical landscape of how important it is to have our own resources out of the ground and processed on home soil, because I think it's a different world than 10, 15, 20 years ago.
I I totally agree with you on that, and on several fronts, not just the geopolitical front, but the technological front as well. All right, Mark. Before we get out of here, is there anything that we didn't talk about that we should?
Yeah, I just want to highlight the importance of nuclear power to the nation. 20% of the nation's electricity still comes from nuclear power. And, those 94 reactors that we have in the country, they consume 50 million pounds of uranium per year. And in 2024, the nation only produced 677,000 pounds. And in 2025, it was 2.1 million pounds. So you can see that it's not enough. And half of that comes from Canada and Australia, but the other half is Russia, Uzbekistan, and Kazakhstan. And if Russia and China and India continue to do their build out, there's going to be less and less of that uranium available to the United States. And just want to highlight how important each pound of American uranium is.
That, I think, crystallizes the scarce resource opportunity, Mark.
Yeah,
Excellent.
definitely.
Excellent, excellent. Well, Mark, thank you so much for joining me today. A lot to think about. And for folks who want to continue to follow the story, what's the best place for them to go?
Yeah, so we're listed on the NASDAQ under the ticker NUCL. Our website is eaglenuclear.com, and you can follow us on LinkedIn or X under Eagle Nuclear.
Excellent, excellent. Mark, thank you so much for joining me today. And I want to reserve the right to call you back in call it, the next few quarters to get an update on where you guys stand. This power issue, this electrical pain point that we talk about is indeed a very big issue and one that we're tracking, extremely closely. So thank you for everything today.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
Anytime. And folks, that is the latest episode of the Stocks and Market Podcast. We'll be back with a fresh episode before you know it.